This time on Poll Hub, we're digging into our new poll with NPR and the PBS NewsHour as only we can, because it's our poll. We'll take a look at what voters are thinking about Biden, Trump, and a bunch of the others waiting in the wings. Plus, we've got some interesting insights into what Americans are thinking about tech companies as the Supreme Court this week heard arguments in a case that could upend the entire industry. Then USA Today's Susan Page joins to talk about women in politics. The latest trigger for this topic was CNN's Don Lemon disparaging GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley because of her age. Note that she is 51. Susan has some thoughts on that, as do we. And sort of a desert island disc fun fact about food. Confused? Well, you won't be. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I am Lee Maringhoff.
We have a new poll out with our partners at NPR and the PBS NewsHour. We asked a lot of questions, and we do want to dig into these and unpack some of them because there's some really interesting stuff in here. But let's start with kind of the headline here, which is Joe Biden's approval rating. Sometimes in our polls, it's not so much a headline because it doesn't change, but it has been inching up. And in the case of registered voters, he is just shy of 50%, which is close to a high watermark for him since the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was 18 months ago. What do you see, Lee? You follow this approval number. This is one of your favorite things to look at for a presidency. What are we seeing, and what does it mean?
Well, I think Joe Biden is he's the opposite of the victim. He's benefiting from the curse of low expectations. He's been kind of beaten down for so long. And since certainly the Afghanistan debacle or whatever you want to call it. And now starting, I think, with the State of the Union, maybe with the midterm elections, actually, where the Democrats and Biden had the best midterm election for a first-time president in 88 years. Which was certainly noteworthy and I think caught a lot of people by surprise. And then the State of the Union, his deft handling of the GOP and the whole energy with that, and now off to Europe with a surprise trip. He's defying the low energy. He's just too old to be a successful president. And so I think that's showing up in the numbers. Democrats are now much more comfortable with him as their potential nominee, and it's just not because they're afraid of any kind of alternative in chaos. So I would say that's good news for President Biden. And timing, as we know, is a lot about politics. It's a good time to start getting your numbers up.
Well, also, I think after the midterm elections and with a lot of Republicans starting to throw their hat in the ring to run in 2024, and certainly that's where we have our sights as well. I think the White House is getting into campaign mode rather than just White House messaging mode, which they weren't terribly good at. I think they're much more comfortable in this space, and particularly the president. I think he knows how to run a good campaign, and I think the 2024 campaign has already begun. In that light, we did ask another question of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents. Those are the folks who are likely to be able to vote in primaries as we enter that season. But we asked them whether they thought they had a better chance of winning the White House in 2024 with Biden as the Democratic nominee. Or someone else, which is, quite a wide scope there. You can kind of put in your own picture. And he had been struggling in that question previously. And so this time around, 50% of Democrats and Democratic independents said that they thought he would be the better nominee. And I think that is something that is really striking. Just months ago, a little bit before the midterms, when we were asking that question, he was in the low 40s among Democrats, and so I think there is a change. And as they get into campaign mode, he's more in step.
And the flip side of Joe Biden is Donald Trump, at least in a 2020 setting. And Trump was the first candidate to announce on the GOP side. I think another headline out of this poll is the favorable number among Republicans and Republican-leaning independents for Donald Trump. There are other people running, Nikki Haley, who we'll talk about on this podcast. But his favorable numbers have kind of gone up and down over time. But kind of the high water mark was in July of 2018, and they've kind of trended down since then. This is the lowest we've seen at 68% since back in early 2016 or mid 2016, when he was, still a candidate but had a lot of troubles. Is this a warning sign for Donald Trump? Is this an encouraging sign for people like Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley?
Yeah, well, I think you go back to Donald Trump and you say, well, this is a guy, whose numbers, defy where he would like to be. In politics, the lesson before Donald Trump broke every rule was you have to keep redefining and defining yourself constantly in politics. And Donald Trump is now the same show. He's coming out with the same formula he's had. And maybe that's running a little stale. Although in a crowded field, Barb will be quick to to
Yes,
jump
I was
in.
just about to jump in, Lee.
If there's a half a dozen Republicans and they go to a primary, it's amazing what 30 or 35% can do.
But also 68% is the highest number of any of the Republicans we asked about.
Yes,
Ron
of
DeSantis
course.
is 66%. So yeah, it's down, but Barb, he's still
Yeah,
king of the hill.
absolutely. And I think the more Republican candidates that throw their hat in the ring, I mean, how many did we have? Like almost 20 last time around. So you don't exactly have to have a large proportion to win a Republican primary. And the way those primaries are structured as well, many of them are winner take all. So you end up with the delegates, perhaps with a very small plurality of the vote. So I wouldn't be writing the epitaph on Trump and the Republican Party just yet. I mean, yes, Jay, you mentioned that these are the numbers that he has, and hasn't had since 2016. But then again, these are the numbers he had in 2016. So I
And
mean,
he won.
there's right, exactly. So I think there's certainly a lot to be said, and his core base is a very strong, committed base that will turn out for him as well. So lots to unpack there. But I'd also just wanted to mention that there was a lot more in this poll. We asked particularly about the national minimum wage and whether people felt that it was time for a $15 minimum wage. It is a minimum wage that we do see in other states, but whether that could be made across the country as a federal minimum wage, and so quite a large proportion of Americans now support a $15 minimum wage, particularly people who are under 45. We did see a big age difference, and it was a difference too from pre-pandemic. I don't know if that's about the pandemic, if that's about the just inflation. What do you guys see? Are there implications to this? Do you see this as perhaps becoming an issue down the road in our presidential politics?
Yeah, I think the thing on minimum wages, $15 an hour, was something to talk about 10 years ago. I mean, the national minimum wage has been stuck since 2007, 2008, whatever the year is. I think it's a salient issue among Democrats. I don't think it is among Republicans. We see that in this, where there is a real partisan breakdown. And I think that to some degree, the national minimum wage argument has been obviated by the fact that the big companies are paying more than $15 an hour because they can't get workers otherwise. So I kind of doubt this is going to be a big issue in 2024. But, stranger things have happened. But then another question we asked was about the tech industry. The Supreme Court heard a major case this week, and indications are they may not, change the law as it is, but the law protects tech companies from being held liable for the content that is on their platforms, which is different than how the media works. It's different than how television broadcast works. It's different than how newspapers work. To a large degree. So we asked the question, do people think that when it comes to moderating problematic content on social media, is it up to the company or is it up to the government to set rules and define what problematic content is? And this is something Americans agree on across party, across age, across everything. It's one of these few rare issues where there's agreement. 67% of adults, which includes 64% of Democrats, 69% of Republicans, 71% of independents, think it's up to the companies. The Supreme Court seems to think that is correct based on what some of the questioning was from both conservative and liberal members. The last question I just wanted to raise is because I think we're a little different than what some other polls have been, and this is on another topic that's all over the news this week because Joe Biden went to Ukraine, and that is, are we giving the right amount, too much, too little support to Ukraine? We asked it in an interesting way. We didn't say too much or too little. And if you look at too much, or if you look at people thinking that the right amount of support for Ukraine, along with we should do more, that's 67%, which is 2/3 of Americans basically think the path I think we're on is right in Ukraine. I think some of the polling, or at least some of the reporting on polling, has indicated that Americans are not as supportive. And I think our poll kind of makes the
Yeah.
case that you got to ask the question more carefully.
Yeah, I think, and if you look at it, as you say, the spending too much beats the should be increased, but not if you throw the right amount in, which is a lot of money to be spent. Going back to our original point on this was Joe Biden. It's interesting that he has now connected the issue of democracy domestically with the issue of democracy in the Ukraine. And I can't think of probably a better word maybe than family values to run on than democracy. And so I think he's got himself well positioned for certainly a presidential campaign, age notwithstanding.
Well, CNN anchor Don Lemon recently made headlines with his comments dismissing the new Republican candidate for president, Nikki Haley, and he certainly paid a price for it. On CNN this morning, he said, quote, Nikki Haley isn't in her prime. Sorry. A woman is considered to be in her prime in her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s. Well, Don Lemon is 56. Nikki Haley is 51. He later apologized on Twitter for his remarks, calling them inartful and irrelevant, and was off the air for a couple of days on presumably a already scheduled vacation. But this opened up the question, is there an expiration date for women in politics? Susan Page, Washington bureau chief of USA Today and author of Madam Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and the Lessons of Power, wrote about this very topic in USA Today. And we've got a treat. She is joining us today. Welcome, Susan.
It's so good to be back with you. Thank you.
Great to see you. Now, you guys at USA Today partnered with Suffolk University and did a poll at the end of last year, which showed that half of Americans believe an ideal president, if they could choose, would be between 51 and 65 years of age. So Nikki Haley actually checks that box. The same poll also showed that a majority, 55%, said gender didn't matter when it came to the presidency. But of course, that does leave 45%, which is an awful lot of people who said that it does, or perhaps were just unsure about it, which includes 50% of Republicans who said their ideal president is a man. Don Lemon certainly isn't the first to criticize a female candidate. We've all lived through Hillary Clinton's many campaigns where she received lots of backlash from everything, from the way she dressed to the way she spoke. So what does this say about the future of women in politics?
Well, it says that women in politics still face some special hurdles. That when a man starts to get gray hair and some jowls, people think he looks more distinguished. When that happens to a woman, there are questions raised about whether this is a face you want to see every day if they're elected president. That was a comment that was sometimes made when Hillary Clinton was running for president, not a comment made about Donald Trump, who was running against her. So I think that even though women have made some significant progress when it comes to politics, a record number of women, for instance, now serving in the Congress, the first woman ever elected president pro tem of the Senate this year, there is still a ways to go if you're looking for equal treatment of men and women. And I tell you, that is especially true among Republicans, women wishing to run as Republicans. 50% of Republicans in our poll said they would prefer a man as their candidate. 2% said they would prefer a woman, which is, by the way, below our margin of error.
So it could be minus a negative force on that. Yeah, when I looked at the numbers and some of the information that you provided in your article, it just seemed, if you're if you're under 40 or whatever, you're too young, and if you're sort of over 45 or whatever, you're already past your prime. There just seemed to be a very small window of acceptability between too young and too old. Um, I, I saw the numbers on the Senate and the House, and I reacted. I was somewhat surprised that the numbers had gotten that high, but then again, this is decades since these arguments have been on the table. And so, do you look at those as being sort of a glass that's half full or a quarter full or three quarters empty still?
Well, better than it used to be. But if you think about gender parity, we're
Yeah.
not nearly there. And if you look at the kind of comparison with the rest of the world, the US now ranks 72nd in terms of female representation in the parliament or the Congress. The United States lags behind most other mature democracies when it comes to the participation of women in elective office. And of course, the United States has yet to elect the first woman president. So the glass is either half full or half empty, maybe in some ways both. We do have the first woman ever as vice president. We also shouldn't forget Nancy Pelosi, who just this year stepped down as the most powerful woman in the history of American government. And by the way, she defied the age stereotype. She was 82 at the point she stepped down as Speaker of the House. So we have some exceptions. But if you look at the broad numbers, I think you'd have to say, why is the United States, which leads the world in so many ways, lagging on this one?
Well, maybe that's our question for you. You've written about, Nancy Pelosi, and she certainly is an exceptional person, um, man or woman. But is she really going to be an aberration, or is she what our future is about?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I'm from Kansas. We're naturally an optimistic people. And so I would say, yeah, we're going to make progress. We're going to elect a woman president in my lifetime. Nancy Pelosi will not be an aberration. We will see women in leadership positions throughout the government. But I think it's a harder task than we might have predicted 100 years ago when women finally got the right to vote.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
has
and
been.
I was just going to say that it's not that men are immune from this. I think that President Biden's biggest hurdle right now is questions about his age, and he's in his early 80s as well. But I guess Senator Grassley is just hitting his stride, where Senator Feinstein is over the hill, and they're both the same age. So that defies numbers don't seem to apply when it comes to gender. And I guess Speaker Pelosi was the exception because of her exceptional talents. But as you say, I think it's a big lift, a big obstacle.
Well, how big a problem is ageism in politics? Because I mean, to kind of put this into context, this actually started because Nikki Haley was advocating for mandatory competency tests for politicians older than 75, making that very point against President Biden. So is this? I certainly understand that there's a lot of sexism in politics, but how much is ageism also a problem?
Well, ageism, I think, works in both ways. I think Americans, particularly when they're looking at the top jobs like president, they want somebody who's been around a while, who knows something about foreign policy, who has some experience in dealing with big issues. But they're also attracted to young, a new generation of leadership. How many times have we heard that expressed, not just by Nikki Haley, but going back to John F. Kennedy? So Americans, I think, value kind of both aspects of aging. I do think that when we think about the presidency in particular, which is the most important political job we could think of, that we can ask Americans what their ideal is, but they make their judgment based on a whole combination of factors, including some they probably couldn't articulate. So Americans don't say, here are my 6 ideals, and I'm going to just choose someone in this age group. They look at the mix of qualities that a candidate brings and say, this is the person I'm going to trust with my future. And I think that's the reason, for instance, that Barack Obama was able to become the first Black person elected president of the United States. People didn't say, oh, I think it's time to elect a Black person. They said, here is the person compared to the alternatives that I want to support for president. And I actually think that is what will happen with a female candidate, that we will, I hope in not too long, have a female candidate in one of the parties that voters say, hey, look at that person. That's the person I trust.
Is there
You
a
know, we
party
both
difference in all this in terms of, you mentioned that Republicans the attitudes seem to lag, but yet there's now an increase, I guess, in Republicans also in the House.
Yes, although
who are women? Who are women?
Who are women,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, the number of women Republicans, I think, went down one in 2020. I think Republicans, that went up in the 2022 midterms, but Republicans have seen not the kind of gains among female representation in the Congress that Democrats have. And part of that is because Democrats have really focused on diversifying in race and gender, their membership in Congress. Republicans have been averse to that because they talk about wanting to make, they don't like identity politics. They want the qualities of individuals to rise to the top. And that is just beginning to change thanks to thanks in part to Elise Stefanik, a member of Congress you all know well, who has started a PAC and pursued the idea that Republicans need to elect more women to Congress as well. But at the moment, Democrats far outpace Republicans when it comes to electing women to Congress.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity of asking you the question from your perspective as having been one of the most successful women reporters in Washington. What's it like in journalism? I mean, are we seeing the glass ceiling shattering a little bit?
Well, let's talk about TV journalism, because I can tell you that politics has nothing on TV journalism when it comes to age discrimination against women. Women, as a general rule, have a very tough time aging on the air in contrast to men.
Susan, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
It's always my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
And I always enjoy talking to Susan Page. But we do move on to the fun fact, which is also an enjoyable moment. And the question was a poll which was done with CBS News Vanity Fair in 2012. And the question was, if all food only had one flavor, which of the following would you most like that flavor to be? Steak, chocolate, broccoli, watermelon, or mashed potatoes? I didn't see my McDonald's hamburgers in here, but chocolate wins out 34%, maybe not surprising. Steak at 30%, and then we fall down to watermelon and mashed potatoes, and broccoli at a mere 6%. So chocolate, your one flavor for morning, noon, and night.
Yeah, no, way too sweet.
I
Way
think
too
what's
sweet.
the way I love this as a fun fact, because who thought of this question and those answers and why?
They used Chat GPT. No,
Well, not in
they didn't.
2012 or 2011.
I know they didn't. It was 2011, but you kind of got the feeling this was a group of pollsters that had been polling a lot, and they were up really late. And so yes, it was actually a December poll. So they can't use a big election as an excuse. But
It's
yeah,
just,
that was kind of odd.
but it's so weird
Yeah.
because wouldn't you might, I mean, I can see asking a question, what's your favorite food? If you could only eat one food, would it be chocolate? Would it be steak? But if all food had only one flavor, it's kind of some dystopian science fiction nightmare. Like, I don't know. It's crazy. Athen found this, and kudos for finding so far in our 284 episodes, I think, the oddest fun fact question, the oddest polling question.
And
frankly,
what would
that
you
I've seen.
like your food to taste like, Jay?
I don't want it to taste like one flavor. That is that
Yeah.
is my dystopian nightmare. That because I love food, and that really is pretty close to my nightmare there is that everything
Yeah.
would taste the same. Ugh,
I know what Barb's would be. Barb's would be salt and pepper.
it'd be
Right.
ice
You know,
cream.
yeah. Well, I
Exactly.
actually, my original take on this question was wrong. I thought the question actually read, what would be your number one flavor to go along with steak? And then I saw chocolate one, and I couldn't imagine putting steak with some Fox's You Bet chocolate sprinkles across the top of it. But no, it is a favorite. If you had nothing else, it's chocolate, and then you get steak. Maybe soda or beer would have.
I
Kinda
think
knocked
this.
that-
I think
I don't
this
know.
was just a late night and a really odd group of question writers.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis and Will Promazel.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub,
There is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll
see
see
you
you
next
next time.